In the heart of England lies Staffordshire, a county of breathtaking beauty, fascinating culture, outstanding craftsmanship, and world-famous industry. It's also a county with a rich literary heritage, some well known and a part of the great British canon, and some not so well known. So join us on a journey into Staffordshire's literary past, its present, and its future. Perhaps the best-known Staffordshire author was born in the south of the county, in Lichfield. Dr. Johnson is considered not only one of Britain's great writers, but also one of its great personalities. He was also the subject of one of the most famous single works of biographical art in the whole of literature, James Boswell's Life of Samuel Johnson. The family home still stands today.
Johnson was a Staffordshire lad. He was born in this very room in September 1709. His father was from Derbyshire and moved to Lichfield with his family in the 1660s, and he set up a book-selling business just a few doors down on Sadler Street, as it was known then. The family moved into this house he built this house, in fact, in the early 1700s to house his new wife, Sarah Ford, who'd come from Kings Norton Way, and their new son, who came along 2 years afterwards, Samuel Johnson. Books were very important to Johnson, and we know that he was very inspired by sitting in his father's bookshop just downstairs and going through the volumes. His early education was here. He was taught by Dame Oliver at a school just across the Market Square, and also by his mother, who taught him to read from the Book of Common Prayer in this house. He includes Lichfield in his famous dictionary. He includes an entry on it, and in there he writes Salva Magna Parens, which means Hail Great Mother. He famously said that every man has a lurking wish to appear considerable in his native place, and he was very pleased to see that his portrait had been admired by people in Lichfield. So I think his hometown meant a great deal to him.
Sir, we are a city of philosophers. We work with our heads and make the boobies of Birmingham work for us with their hands. I lately took my friend Boswell and showed him genuine civilized life in an English provincial town. I turned him loose at Lichfield, that he might see for once real civility. A decent provision for the poor is the true test of civilization. A man may write at any time if he will set himself doggedly to it. No man but a blockhead ever wrote except for money. Patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. You can never be wise unless you love reading.
We could devote a whole film to the life of Dr. Johnson, even a whole series. In fact, there's a rather popular book devoted to his life, but there is plenty more to discover as we delve into Staffordshire's literary past. Isaac Walton was born over 100 years before Dr. Johnson in Stafford. Walton was the author of The Complete Angler, which was first published in 1653. It is still to this day considered to be an indispensable guide to angling, enjoyed by fishermen across the world. You can visit the cottage owned by Isaac Walton in Shallowford, near Eccleshall. It offers a fantastic insight into the world of Isaac Walton.
The cottage is a traditional 16th century farm building, really. It's timber, half timbered, and then filled in with wattle and daub. So it's the sort of cottage that any rural person in the 16th century would have lived in. And certainly it's one that Isaac Walton would have recognised as a typical Staffordshire home, really, for the rural people. The thing about Isaac Walton is you have to remember that he lived to be 90, and he really finished working in the true sense of the word in his 50s. So the last 40 years were when he sort of turned his attention a little bit more back to Staffordshire. But the great joy of his life, of course, was fishing, was angling. And so it was at that point that he started to pull together what we now know as the complete angler. And Staffordshire was at the heart of that because the rivers were so brilliant. The complete angler was something that he created over many years. It gives not just the actual skill of fishing, but the rod and line, but also the ability to appreciate sitting quietly in the countryside and enjoying the countryside. It has all of that built into this one book. It is the complete angler. What he produced reflects back on the countryside of Staffordshire. Staffordshire is a very diverse county. It goes from potteries at one end to brewing at the other, and then it moves down into the black country and heavy industry. But around all of that is this wonderful countryside that remains a reflection of what Walton wrote about and is still here today. You can still sit on the bank of the river and think, well, I'm in Staffordshire. Staffordshire has benefited from the fact that we can counter the industrialisation that the county's had with the fact that it is actually a very nice green place to be.
What would a blind man give to see the pleasant rivers and meadows and flowers and fountains that we have met with since we met together? And for the most part of them, because they be so common, most men forget to pay their praises. But let not us, because it is sacrifice so pleasing to him that made that sun in us and still protects us and gives us flowers and showers and stomachs and meat and content and leisure to go a-fishing.
Stoke-on-Trent is widely acknowledged as the home of ceramic design and is affectionately referred to as the Potteries. Originally, this great city was made up of 6 towns, and they featured heavily in the works of one of Stoke-on-Trent's most famous sons, Arnold Bennett. Well, at least 5 of them did.
The phrase first started in his book Anna of the Five Towns, which was written at the beginning of the 1900s. And he said, oh well, Anna of the Five Towns just sounds better than Anna of the Six Towns.
To him, the phrase 5 towns was more impressive than 6 towns. And he specifically says the I in 5 is an open vowel, 5 towns. The I in 6 is a closed vowel, 6, and it's not nearly so impressive. And he wanted a loud-sounding phrase for the district, so 5 did it. And Fenton was not then such a separate entity and lost out.
And he doesn't talk about Fenton. I mean, he talks in the book about going to Axe. In many books that he talks about going to Axe. Axe is Leek. Shawport is Port Hill. He talks about that. Oldcastle is Newcastle, but he never mentions Fenton.
Arnold Bennett was born in May 1867 in a terraced house in Hanley, or Hambridge as it was known in Bennett stories, inspired by the Potteries. He worked for a brief spell at his father's solicitor's firm and moved to London in 1889, but he never forgot his Potteries heritage.
There's one fascinating aspect of Bennett's work, and that is the fact that it's a little bit of a sort of almost a puzzle, because he gives the names of the towns, similar names. Hanley is Hanbridge.
Tunstall is Turnhill.
Burslem is Bursley.
Longton was Longshore. Stoke, for some unaccountable reason, was Knype. K-N-Y-P-E.
Waterloo Road becomes Trafalgar Road in his novels, and Swanbank becomes Duck Bank.
St John Square, he called it St Luke's Square.
The Leopard Inn, quite a famous pub which is called the Tiger Inn in the novels.
But the Town Hall in Burslem, Bennett mentions in many of his books.
The Dragon Hotel, as it appears in the fiction, which is the George Hotel, which is, of course, is still there.
He refers to the Wedgwood Institute, which you can go and see still today in Queen Street, fantastic building, which he referred to as the Art College.
In fact, Margaret Drabble, who wrote a biography of him, She said that when she comes to the potteries, she sometimes can't remember what the real name of the places should be.
There is a lot of enjoyment to be taken from reading about a place that you can then go out and see these buildings are still around, even though we're sort of 100 years in the future now. One of the important aspects of a place like Stoke-on-Trent is many of those buildings are still around. There's a kind of clear heritage that's there that comes through in the writing.
The Arnold Bennett Society meet every year in Bennett's hometown to celebrate his life and work.
Today is the 7th annual conference of the Society. We have 11 speakers from different parts of the country. We have mostly academics, but not all. The aim of the Society is to promote Arnold Bennett, but also as a subsidiary aim to promote other North Staffordshire writers. He was very much influenced by his background and by what he knew of the potteries and the potteries people, and he wrote so sympathetically about them, understood so much of what was going on here.
Well, his legacy to North Staffordshire and the potteries is putting us on the international map of literature. We're known because of Arnold Bennett. You go to America, 5 towns of pottery, oh, Arnold Bennett. So we're worldwide. We have a profile because of Arnold Bennett.
5 Towns books certainly made his name, but I think from there on, the man just could not stop writing. The only way you'd stop him from writing was cut his fingers off, but he'd find a way around that, I'm sure.
It would be interesting to find out what Bennett would make of North Staffordshire today, and you can, well, sort of. Professor Ray Johnson regularly performs as the great author and shares with an eager audience his thoughts on Stoke-on-Trent through his Bennett readings.
Let's start with something from Anna. So we start to focus you into what is the potteries, where are the potteries? This is from chapter 1 of Anna of the 5 Towns. Beneath them, in front, stretched a maze of roofs, dominated by the gold angel of the town hall spire. Bursley, the ancient home of the potter, has an antiquity of 1,000 years. It lies towards the north end of an extensive valley, which must have been one of the fairest spots in Alfred's England, but which is now defaced by activities of 250,000 people. 5 contiguous towns, Turnhill, Bursley, Hanbridge, Knipe and Longshore, united by a single winding thoroughfare some 8 miles in length, have inundated the valley like a succession of great lakes.
North Staffordshire has been the inspiration for stories by some of the best-known novelists. The Etruria Valley is now home to award-winning, state-of-the-art office blocks. But the view from Basford Bank was very different 120 years ago, when one of Arnold Bennett's contemporaries came to stay.
H.G. Wells, he moved in 1884 to what was called the Normal School, which is now part of Imperial College. There he studied biology under Thomas Huxley, and he had a friend who was named William Burton, and they were good friends. 1887 they both graduated, and William Burton came to Basford. He came to live in Basford, and he came to work at Wedgwood's Etruria factory, which is just down in the Etruria Valley. H.G. Wells was ill, he was not well, he'd had an accident, and Burton and his new wife invited Wells in 1888 to come and spend a few months convalescing. So in 1888, while he was staying there with his friend in Basford, he started to sketch out and write a good portion of a book which was later published called In the Days of the Comet. And this describes when a comet came near to the Earth and the influence of the comet on the people there. And he describes industrial scenes in this book. He describes the Loop Line railway. He talks about Newcastle under Lyme, and in the same way that Bennett disguised the names, so Wells did the same. But he talks about the furnaces. He was so influenced by the industrial landscape, he refers to it in the famous book The War of the Worlds, and he describes how the Martians were going along firing the death ray, and how at night time you could look over the valley and see the destruction of the Martians. And he says that the fires were like the kilns of the potteries. At night time, of course, there are no street lights, so you get the lights from the kilns, the lights from the slag being tipped. There was also foundries. So the whole of the landscape was industrial, fire and flames, which would be very vivid, and it really impressed on Wells's mind the power of descriptive prose. And to the left, between the railway and the dark mass of the low hill beyond, dominating the whole view, colossal, inky black and crowned with smoke and fitful flames, stood the great cylinders of the Jedediah Company blast furnaces, the central edifices of the great ironworks of which Horrocks was the manager. They stood heavy and threatening, full of incessant turmoil, of flames and seething molten iron, and about the feet of them rattled the rolling mills, and the steam hammer beat heavily and splashed the white iron sparks hither and thither. Even as they looked, a truck full of fuel was shot into one of the giants, and the red flames gleamed out, and a confusion of smoke and black dust came boiling upwards towards the sky.
One of the best-loved sons of North Staffordshire is Arthur Berry. Some people have labelled him the Lowry of the Potteries, and at the Burslem School of Art, Berry created many masterpieces. But his writing demands as much attention, in particular a monologue written in 1979 about one of his favourite subjects, the pub.
I sat down and wept when I remembered the lost pubs of Burslem, the demolished Star that stood where the Moonglow Ballroom stands now, on the corner of the Street of the Preacher and the Tote Office. It was a gaunt, dark building, nicknamed the Star of Bethlehem, a grimy, stuccoed star, the colour of years of wet smoke. From outside, it looked forbidding and empty, lit only by one or two naked electric light bulbs. Its doors were difficult to find. Its main door, on the corner of the square, had been screwed down for some reason, and on the inside covered with a piece of plywood. Only the side doors would let you in, and these were narrow and difficult to open. One was in Queen Street, and the other in William Clowes Street, opposite the Dolphin. For all its dreary appearance, the Star was the highest drinking temple in town. Nothing has been the same since it was knocked down. No pub has ever been more lamented.
It's like 5 or 6 big mollusks, the Potteries is. Mollusks covered in a haze of smoke which is very beautiful at times. It's a purple, a rust-coloured purple, like the colour of moths' wings under light. Each town has an argument of streets, and each of the arguments has a kind of geometry of its own, a geometry of codge and bodge, as though it's never actually been thought out. It's all just occurred. It's, in a way, great and curious scabs. I think it seems a harsh thing to say, but beautifully coloured. The effluent from the smoke and the richness of the patina. It is a thing that if you didn't love, you'd better get out. But if you did love, you'll never ever get away. It's like a spell, a curiously hazy, wet, damp spell, I always think the Potteries is.
Arthur Berry was truly a Potteries writer, in the sense that because he was an artist, very little escaped his eye and his memory. So therefore he could go into his most beloved places like public houses and capture a whole scene and almost detail it in the utmost of minutiae. He was a reproducer of the present, and by doing that, he captured really forever that instant memory. Almost a photograph in words, an excellent writer.
There is still a strong literary tradition throughout Staffordshire, and the North Staffordshire Press are right at the heart of it. They have a passion for literature and Staffordshire writers. From their base at the Staffordshire University Business Village in Stoke-on-Trent, North Staffordshire Press publish a wide range of books. They also have a strong background in providing first-time authors with an opportunity to see their work in print.
We published one book, and that got some publicity locally in the media, the Sentinel. Other writers realised there's an opportunity to get published, so they contacted us, and the whole thing's gradually snowballed. We're on to our 13th, 14th book now, and we've got another 4 or 5 in the pipeline. There's a wide range of genre, from poetry, children's writers, and history, local history. I think more and more people are realising that it's possible to get their work into print, and therefore it gives an incentive to sit down and get writing.
Other writers inspired to write by their lives growing up in Staffordshire include Hector Emanuele. His book, A Sense of Belonging, tells the story of his life growing up in Staffordshire as an Italian immigrant.
I started writing about 4 years ago, and it encompasses my life, my childhood, my teenage years in the potteries. And the people spoke different dialects for a start, which I found very, very strange. But it didn't take me long to start talking in pottery. I'm very keen on art. And for a while I worked at the local pottery firm at Tunstall, A.G. Richardson and Company, and I wanted to be a designer, an artist. And it's influenced me. I love the potteries and the skills that the people have got. I wouldn't live anywhere else. It's inherent, isn't it, in people. They absorb these things without knowing it, and it helps you in your thoughts and in your writing.
Paul Breeze's book, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, tells the story of rock music and revenge on the streets of Stoke-on-Trent.
It's about a guitarist in a rock band who gets just on the verge of success, who gets beaten up so badly that he can no longer play the guitar. And he comes back to Stoke, where the attack happened, to track down and seek his revenge on those who did it to him. I was born, brought up and live in Stoke-on-Trent. Everything is rooted in Stoke-on-Trent for me. That doesn't mean to say that the themes of anything you write have to be necessarily parochial. It's just that whatever all roads go out, they all come back to yourself. You're always going to be influenced by where your roots are.
One author, undisputably in touch with his roots, is children's writer Phil Calvert, creator of Skabatty.
It started off when I was a child, when my dad used to tell us a story about Skabatty, and then, as I say, I decided to actually put it down into print last year, obviously creating different aspects of the character. And with being an illustrator and cartoonist, it was quite easy for me to draw how I imagined this Skabatty would look. He's like a 6-foot hairy yeti who lives up in the moorlands. And basically the plot of the story is that he's never seen by anybody at all. He keeps himself hidden away, and he's got little friends who visit him, and it's quite a little intriguing plot about avoiding to be seen, really. I live relatively close to the Roaches. Spent a lot of time walking and hiking over there, as well as the other surrounding areas. It's just quite a dramatic landscape that I think lends itself to someone who illustrates and writes. Obviously Staffordshire, and especially the moorlands up where we are now, is a very dramatic landscape, which really does inspire someone like myself as a writer and an artist. Obviously there's the roaches nearby, the rocky outcrops, the woodland, the valleys, and all them sort of locations are hidden and weaved within the story itself.
The middle of England, well nearly, just left a bit and up a few miles, but definitely not a long way from the sea. Trees and fields as far as the eye can see, a few hills and valleys, rivers and the occasional goblin. A nice place to call home, especially if you're scared of people. In one of the valleys lived some very interesting creatures. Creatures that were seldom seen by humans, but lived there they did. The old oak trees and caves provided shelter, and the clean fresh water flowing through the valley was used for all manner of things, especially for drinking and catching the fish.
The history of authors and writing across Staffordshire is a rich and varied one, and hopefully this film has helped give an insight into the role the county has played in English literature. We've taken a tour through the pages of Staffordshire's literary past and met some of the people dedicated to preserving and promoting this heritage. We've also met some of those interested in promoting its future. But we've only scratched the surface, and your journey shouldn't end here when there's so much more to explore and enjoy.